Okay, so again, 4 considerations. We've talked about the rate of return. There's fixed, variable, and now index. So hopefully you're familiar and comfortable with all of those 3 different options. Now let's talk about average versus actual rate of returns and the impact of losses, and then we'll talk about taxes and fees. So let me ask you a question. If I could offer you a 25% average return, would I have your attention? That could solve a lot of your problems, right? Heck, you could probably triple your retirement income by getting a 25% return every year. That would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it? Let me ask you another question. Would you rather have a 50% return on half your money or a 5% return on all of your money? Interesting, isn't it? Let's look at the average versus actual rate of returns. Okay, so here we have the actual versus average returns. So let's say that we're starting with $100,000. And again, remember, I offered you a 25% average return. So let's say that you give me $100,000. And in the first year, I lose 50% of your money. Sorry about that, okay? But I convince you to hang in there because next year is looking to be a really good year. And sure enough, okay, the next year, we have 100% return on your money. 100% return on your money. Not a 50% return, 100% return on your money. But it's 100% on half the money because the previous year, we lost half your money. So although you got a 100% return in the second year, it was a 100% return on half the money. However, if you ask your math teacher, down 50, up 100, that is an average of 25%. Now, yes, this is an extreme example to prove a point, but believe it or not, just a simple 5% every year, or actually a 0. Let's say that the first year, instead of losing 50%, okay, so in the first year, if we didn't lose that 50%, in the second year, we only got a 5%, not a 100% return, just a 5% return, we would still be money ahead. We would still be better off with just a 5% return because we didn't lose any money. That is the impact of losses and how they can affect your money. Yes, this is an extreme example, but in a minute we'll look at the actual stock market history, but this is just to prove a point of how actual versus average works. And here's the scary thing. A lot of financial institutions can sell products based on average returns. So you might get a product that has an average return of 10%. You do your little rule of 72 calculation, or you jump online to a compounding interest calculator. You think you're going to have lots of money for retirement. The next thing you know, you show up to retirement and you're a lot short. That's what you've got to consider, is how all of this really works. Okay, so now let's actually compare the actual rate of return of the fixed, the variable, and the indexing strategies. Now, the variable strategy is kind of hard, so I'm going to use the S&P 500 as a benchmark. Now, the reason is because even Warren Buffett says he can't beat the S&P 500. So I'm guessing that most of you are not consistently beating the S&P 500. Maybe you have a 401k, an IRA, money in the market. Maybe you have an amazing financial planner or a stockbroker who is crushing it and getting you way better returns than even Warren Buffett is getting. But for this particular video, let's just use the S&P 500 as a benchmark to compare the fixed, the variable, and the indexed. Okay, now to start with, I want to use the S&P 500 as our benchmark, but I'm not going to use the dividends because, like I said, most of you probably are not investing directly in the actual S&P index fund. So this is minus the dividends, but it's still going to be higher returns than most people are getting. I'm also going to take you down a little, little history, a little trip down memory lane, and we're going to look at 1980 to 1999. Now, we need to talk a little bit about what was going on during this particular 20 years. This was when your baby boomers were hitting the peak earning years, and they started to take away their pensions. They started to replace their pensions with 401ks. It was also during the early 80s that Wall Street came out with mutual funds that allowed an average person to put $50 away into the stock market instead of only the wealthy being able to buy individual stocks in the stock market. So we had this perfect marriage. We had Wall Street's mutual funds that they put inside the 401ks. We had corporations that were getting rid of pensions and moving all of the focus to the 401ks, and we had the baby boomers reaching their peak earning years, and it was the perfect storm. The money just flooded the stock market. We had 25% returns. We had 14, 17, 26, 14, 12, 27, 26, and then we had Al Gore invent the internet, and what do you know? We had the dot-com boom. We had 34, 20, 31. By the way, I don't know if Al Gore really invented the internet. That was just a joke. But the point is in the late 90s, the market was going gangbusters, okay? During this particular 20 years, the average return was 14.67. The actual return was just under 14. Still really, really good. In fact, during that 20 years, if you had $1 to begin with, you would have ended up with almost $14 when it was all said and done. This is where buy term and invest the difference came out. This is where everyone wanted their money in the stock market. It was just the only place that people wanted to put their money. Okay? Now, let's fast forward a little bit and let's look at the last 23 years, starting with our first, let me go over here, our first little crash. We had the dot-com crash. Apparently, a website with a .com at the end was not worth millions of dollars after all. So we had the dot-com crash. We also had 9/11 in there. And if you had $1, it would have turned into, $1 would have turned into 60 cents. Okay? Fast forward, time goes on, over 23 years, the average is 5.9, but the actual has only been 4.26. So over 23 years, your dollar turned into $2.61. So during that particular time, let's say that we go with a floor of 5 and a cap of 5. That's just another way of me putting in 5% every year. We're going to call this a limited return because it's limited to $1. So we have a limited, 5%, sorry. It's limited to 5%. We're not going to get 13% returns. We're going to get 5. But we're not going to lose 38%. We're going to get 5. Okay? So, what strategy works best during this particular time frame? Believe it or not, your limited return, your fixed, this is the fixed strategy. Your fixed return would have done better. Now, in all fairness, let's take out the first couple of years there and let's start with 2003, where the market started off on a positive note of 26%. Let's just time it a little bit differently for that 20 years. Let's look at those 20 years. During those 20 years, the stock market, the variable returns, would have done considerably better than the 5% fixed. Okay? Now, let's look at what we call the indexed strategy, which is a floor of 0. And the best way to kind of illustrate it in this software, and I can go into this in more detail later, but the idea is around 70% on the upside in general. So we're not going to get 13, we might get 9, okay? We're not going to get 29, we might get 20. Yes, you can get 20% returns and higher. Okay, so in this example, we're going to have no losses, right? 0 is the worst we're ever going to get. Let me kind of clear this up a little bit. A lot going on there. Sorry about that. So we're not going to lose 38% in 2008. We are going to get a 0. Now in 2009, we're not going to earn 23%. We might only earn 16. But when it's all said and done during that particular 20 years, the indexing strategy would win. Now, let's go ahead and take out that 2008. Let's start with maybe 2009. Well, now during that 14 years, the actual variable strategy in the stock market would win if you are invested in something that is tracking the S&P 500. So there's a few variables there as well. All right, so my point in all of this is not to try to tell you which one of those three is better. I'm just trying to show you that it depends on the years and it depends on what you're actually looking at and what your objective is, okay? But there are 3 strategies to grow your money: fixed, variable, and indexed, okay?